this system that people talk about, this matrix, this box that guides us, taking our free will. What's it really? See, I like to think of it as the American machine. And it's pretty much built to cause division among ethnicities. Divide and conquer. It was built that way from the very start. Sure, there's been a lot of refinement. The addition of different ethnicities brought its own set of problems, but the machine works no matter who is here. They just have to live here for a significant amount of time to learn how it works. And this learning, if you're not careful, infects the mind learning it, because it'll have you believe that there's no other way for the system to work other than how it has worked for generations. And to believe that is wrong. You can step out of the box. You just have to understand the hundreds of years of conditioning that was put upon American people. The conditioning is on both sides of the coin. One side believes it is the conqueror and superior, while the other side believes that it is inferior. Both sides are sadly mistaken. But let's get back to the beginning of things, because really the moment the Europeans took over and killed the indigenous people of these Americas was when the American machine, this system here, was built. It all started simply enough. America was full of indigenous people, Native Americans. The years were 1500s, respectively. Then Spain and the conquistadors came to the Americas, talking about, "We discovered America." Indigenous tribes were cool about it at first, but basically still said, "Y'all ain't discovered shit. We been here." Now Columbus and the other cats repping Spain, they ain't like that shit. And so they went about taking over these new lands. No American land was safe. Texas, Alabama, Florida, it don't matter where you're from. The indigenous tribes were already here by the millions. And the Spaniards and their conquistadors were taking them out and opening up these lands to other ships from across the sea. Now keep in mind that Spain did not have the hardest time killing the indigenous tribes, because for the most part, the tribes were peaceful. But in time, the tribes soon learned how to put their knives to good use. But those knives couldn't fuck with those swords and full suits of armor worn by the conquistadors. These were half-naked Indians with knives and spears. No contest. Plus, and this is what really killed the Indians, the Spanish actually brought smallpox and other European disease with them in a very real way. They were the first to use biological warfare. There were roughly 115 million natives in America before Spanish forces landed. Estimates say at least 50 to 80% of that number were killed. It's even been said that there were once more Indians than all of Europe at that time. Fast forward, settlers from Europe began to come to the land, thanks to Spanish explorers telling others how to get to America. Quick sidebar. Now when you read our history books, these Europeans are called Western settlers. That may be confusing for some younger folks or the average Joe like myself. They were called Western settlers because North America is on the western hemisphere of planet Earth. The Europeans came from the eastern hemisphere. So when these Europeans came here to settle into America, they were called Western settlers. You may have actually heard the term the Old West. Well, that's what it means. The old western hemisphere of the world. North America and other parts, where the Indians were and the buffalo roam and yada yada yada, you get the drift. So you're going to hear me say the phrase settler and European a lot. But don't worry, that's going to change. Let's get back to history. The indigenous tribes suffered heavy losses due to the conquistadors and smallpox. The American lands were wide open for the taking. Imagine just new land for miles with no one on it. However, surviving Indians were still here in significant amounts. At first, the Western settlers were cool with trading with the Indian, and the Indians were cool as well. Canada traders, for instance, liked fur that natives would hunt, while some Europeans liked copper that Indians sold. Business was good, and the Indians weren't threatening at all. They never were. These were peaceful people until the Spanish explorers like Ponce de Leon and Christopher Columbus found these people and introduced them to horrific shit. They were pushovers. So, more Europeans came, looking to make America home, which they did. This was the beginning of the end for the indigenous people, because while the Spanish began the massacre of the Indian, the influx of more Europeans pretty much finished the job, but in slow, degrading fashion. Fast forward. American lands are now becoming more established, and Indians are starting to see that these European/Western settlers were cool at first, but at some point they will look to take your land. It's what they do. As a matter of fact, it's what they keep doing. And the more land the settlers take over, the stronger they become in number, because more keep coming. And so, one by one, battles between Western settlers and Native Americans happened. Each one started by the settlers for the same reason: expansion of civilization. Quote, with the Indians painted as savages, Sometimes the Indians would win a battle or two, but in the future, they would all lose the war of European expansion. Fast forward, the Indian Removal Act passed in the year 1830. Now keep something in mind, years before, the Indians were already integrated into European settlement. The settlers allowed this integration because at the time, many Europeans began to look at Indians differently. They began to notice similarities in complexion and felt that they could perhaps be related to Europeans. So as you can see right there, colorism is partly tied to familiarity. Someone who looks like you, you're gonna trust faster than someone who looks completely different. The Europeans felt that the only difference was that the Indians were so-called savages. They knew no better. Other than that, they may be kin. This kind of thinking is classism. And so the Europeans took it upon themselves to educate the Indians, with hopes that one day they would be better members of society. This education, of course, also included religious conversion. Remember that for Europeans, religious conversion is extremely important because what it does is it establishes a punishment for doing wrong. It establishes morals, which is a sense of right and wrong, which in turn establishes laws. Laws that the Europeans established to work in their favor. Mind you, these same laws can be argued away with the right legal representation. Religious conversion also has a tendency to infect and destroy generations of indigenous culture. European religion also establishes a savior called Jesus that happens to resemble the European image, even though factually there is no useful description of the physical appearance of Jesus. Some accounts have Jesus with bronze feet and a face that shone like the sun. Others have him with hair white as snow but with a look of wool. Others have Jesus as bronze, the tan skin, Middle Eastern looking. The truth is that there is no scholarly agreement on the appearance of Jesus. But that didn't stop the Europeans from establishing their own Jesus standard based not on the word of the Bible, but on their own culture. And so, this fictional image of Jesus, this standard of goodness, is taught or beaten into the minds of people who are ignorant, or in this case, quote-unquote savages. Jesus, of course, is the Son of God, and God is almighty, and his anger is swift and terrible. You cannot see God, but he, because he has to be a dude, is all around you. So in essence, an ignorant person or a quote-unquote savage is taught that the image of the European male is goodness and kindness, and to rebel against the European male could possibly warrant swift and terrible retribution from an almighty unseen force. This conditioning still works to this day. Now see, all of this kind of shit is when religion is used to enslave. I have no problem with religion. Everyone should believe in something. But when what you believe is used to fool people or bend them to your will or your sick, twisted desires, then you're using your belief system against humanity. You're in essence using your religion to be inhumane. As you'd guess, most Indians were against all this religion and educating. However, tribes like the Cherokee were down with the integration and even religious conversion. They figured that it would be a way toward peace. It didn't work out that way. One of the largest tribes in America, the Cherokee, had lived in small villages in parts of what is now Kentucky, Virginia, Tennessee, the Carolinas, Alabama, and Georgia. By 1819, they had signed treaties ceding over 90% of their land to the United States. Remember, integration is what the Europeans sold. The settlers were slick as fuck. There was also a civilization policy. Many Cherokees had switched from being hunters to farmers. Some even ran plantations and owned slaves. Yes, that is why you see pictures of African people with Indians. Native Americans were not that dark. They were brown at best. That is why the Europeans were able to look at them as kin somewhat. Their children learned Christian religion and English at mission-run schools. A Cherokee alphabet was created, and in the 1820s, the Cherokee Nation began publishing a bilingual newspaper. They established a government and a constitution that was patterned after the United States. But by 1830, in just 11 years, settlers wanted more land, and they were taking these lands rightfully owned by the Indians. The Indians basically said, "What the fuck is this? We did everything you asked, even converted to Christianity. We've even been living among you. Why can't we keep our land?" The answer to that question came from Andrew Jackson's 5th annual address. Now check this shit out. Quote, "They, the Indians, have neither the intelligence the industry, the moral habits, nor the desire for improvement, which is essential to any change in your condition. Established in the midst of another and superior race, they must necessarily yield to the force of circumstances and ere long disappear. Superior race, right there. The language of white nationalism. Well before Hitler started his shit, this, at least for America, is when white right versus every other color begins. Keep in mind that the sensibility of superiority was always there. Remember, they felt the Indians were savages. But this is the first time the wording of superiority was put into policy. Of course, the Indians were against this, but the European settlers had the weapons to make it happen. What they weren't freely given, they simply took. And let this be a major lesson right here. The only reason European settlers were able to do this to the Indians was because the Indians were not as advanced as the Europeans when it came to weapons. Also, the settlers were more unified, while the Indians actually had beef among tribes. They lacked trust and thus could not put together a unified front against the European settlers. Also, smallpox. Let's not forget smallpox. That's a big ass Indian killer right there. So, the European Indian killer machine trucked on from 15th century to 18th and 19th century. That's a lot of killing. All of this culminating with something called the Trail of Tears, when remaining tribes were put onto reservations. It was genocide, pure and simple. They took out the Indians, took their land, took their women, killed their men, and subjugated or integrated, there's that word again, whoever was left. Anyway, as you can see by now, the racist machine could have been any ethnicity. It's simply about who has the most power to dominate. Because the Native Americans from the jump couldn't handle the Spanish invading their lands. But even if they could, they lost too many Indians to disease. It was just a perfect storm. I don't see how the Indians could have stopped any of their lands from being taken at all. The diseases that the Europeans brought with them were just too much. You know, in an alternate world, it could have been Greek settlers who came to the Americas and dominated and established Greek right. Gyros could have been the American stable instead of the hot dog. I mean, both make you fart and shit, but it's the principle of the thing. Or forget about alternate realities. But look at what Israel has done for generations to the land that belonged to Palestine. Indigenous tribes taken over and lands stolen because the tribe lacked the weapons and manpower needed to withstand the machine roaring toward them. But you may ask, what does all this have to do with black and white? We already established classism and nationalism. Where does color come into play? The timeline I covered was from the 1500s all the way to the 1800s. African Americans fit in the middle of it. And don't worry, the shit gets black. You see, in 1619, when allegedly the first Africans arrived in Virginia, religion and wealth, not physical appearance, defined your status. Blackness and whiteness were not yet clear categories of identity. For the first 50 years in the American colonies, most of the laborers were European indentured servants. Many of them were working their asses off in tobacco plantations in fucked up conditions. Now, if any of you don't know what indentured servants are, it's basically a guy who works for a particular amount of time. Once that time is over, he can leave. So indentured servants are not slaves. Let's get back to it. As time went on, little by little, less Europeans were willing to make the trip across the Atlantic Ocean just to be subjected to years of hard work with little pay for their troubles. So, indentured servants just weren't cutting it anymore. The tobacco planters, facing a potential labor shortage, turned to the transatlantic slave trade and gradually replaced indentured servants with African slaves. Finally, Americans found what they considered to be an endless labor supply. Bonus, these people could be readily identified so they couldn't just run away and slip into society like the Native Americans could. Remember, the Indians were European looking, but light colored or brown at best. The laborers from Africa were much darker and shaped different. Also, remember I said earlier that the Indians were being integrated into European society. At this point, the Indians had somewhat of a complexion for the protection, so they got a pass, especially when it was noticed that Africans were more durable in the field. Also remember, at one point, even Indians owned African slaves. It was simply the shit to do, especially if it was allowed. I'm sure that there was Indians who had children with these African slaves, so you have your African/Indian mix from there. Remember, no matter how black and sweaty these African laborers were, white man, white woman, and Native American just couldn't resist having sex with them. The dark fetish was quite real, and sadly, much of it was rape. African slaves could grow tobacco and grow rice. These African slaves were the ideal labor source. Again, the Indians were not built for the work. The white settlers damn sure didn't want to do this kind of work, and so it didn't take long as colony by colony, new laws were made, making slavery permanent and inheritable for these African people. And for the first time, the word white, rather than Christian or Englishman, began appearing in colonial statutes. However, slaves were not yet officially recognized as black, but they were considered to be black when people talked amongst each other. As a matter of fact, in the first U.S. Census taken in 1790, just 4 categories were used: free white males, free white females, other free persons, that would be Indians, and slaves. Not black yet. However, according to the Oxford Dictionary of English, the word nigger was used in 1775. Before that, maybe 1615, but it was spelled N-E-G-A-R, negar. Every version of the word nigger is rooted in the Latin word negere. It means black. The female version is called nigra, N-I-G-R-A. It is an adjective, meaning it's used to describe a person, place, or thing. It was never a noun, which is a person, place, or thing. Let's make that clear. So a man can look like the color niger, but he is not actually the color black. He is still a man, not a black. Let's move on. In the 1820 census, the new category colored was added. Still not black. In the 1850 census, slaves were listed by owner, and a B indicated black, while an M indicated mulatto. By this point, black was official. And so on and so forth. We go right into history to the present. So to summarize, the permanent and inheritable part of the law language would be the start of systemic black/African American racism, in my opinion. However, it was not the start of systemic racism as a whole. The Native Americans were the first to know what systemic racism, classism, felt like, but they were not considered black. And from my research, they never were. As I said earlier, the Europeans saw them as kin almost. They looked like them, not so with African. As you can also see, the white settlers/Europeans frequently changed the laws to benefit them at the expense of others who were non-white. In the year 2019, this continues to happen, but not so overtly. A bunch of laws will come out and a few are carefully worded so that the average person won't notice things like gentrification, predominantly black school closures, money diverted from education for a certain section of town, etc. I gave you the abridged version of the Native Americans. Read up on the Louisiana Purchase, the Trail of Tears, and other moments of Native American history. Read up on Cherokee history. Lots of betrayal by white settlers there as well. Chances are where you're at right now was Indian land. Bottom line is though, to the victor go the spoils. From the very beginning, the Europeans dominated. They established white superiority, and it has been pushed down the throats of every other ethnicity in one way, shape, or form ever since. White is right, and any other color is not, or at best, secondary. Superior. I am better. I am who you should aspire to be. If you are an African American, you may have heard someone say, quote, "I want what white people have." That phrase alone makes me think about someone who feels marginalized. But systemic racism and classism will do that to a person. The system is 100% real. I have earlier videos I posted that show exactly how parts of it affect African Americans on a daily basis. The bottom line is, African Americans did not create white. It was here when we got here. It was thrust upon us. This is when people say that black people can't be racist because we didn't create it, nor are we in charge of the system that created it. However, black people can be complicit to racism, and they are. How do we even begin to break out of this shit? I've got an opinion on that, and it won't be easy for most, just as it wasn't easy for me. You see, the conditioning is real. It's all over the place. The TV is called television programming for a reason. The radio, all forms of major media. It works something like this. Whatever is hot aka what society at large feels is important, is given the most attention in most media forms. It's an attention grab to get your eyes and mind focused on the oncoming conditioning. Society is by admission more anxious than ever. It's because programming is doing nothing but spreading negativity and fear. People can't help but to tune in because they have yet to develop the willpower to do their own thing and not allow propaganda or negativity into their minds. Right now, politics is a new hot button, and so the machine focuses on it, and everything now is an extension of a political story in some way, shape, or form. Even McDonald's can be linked to the current president, and it has. The world of politics has polarized society in a way that hasn't been seen in a very long time. What did I say to you earlier? The machine is built on divide and conquer.